Now, for those of you who have never seen lava from a volcano, here it is, and lots of it. Almost as far as we can see, looking out over this landscape, is all lava rock deposited by a volcano. In fact, if you look directly beneath my shadow, and I'll give you a close-up, you'll see the swirling folds, kind of circular concentric folds in the rock that was caused by its flowing in one direction or another. Now, this kind of volcano, and I don't know its name yet, we'll find out probably later this morning when I get to Craters of the Moon, which is up the road about another 15 miles. But this lava tends to flow either at or just below the surface, and it usually flows in tubes. In other words, the center is hollow. Now, these centers can be as high as 50 feet. These the inside dimension, internal diameter, if you will, can be as much as 50 feet. In a town not too far from here called Shoshone, Idaho, it was known for its ice. And the reason it was known for its ice is up the road a piece from Shoshone, back in the late 18th century, or late 1800s, first part of this century, there was an ice cave, and this cave was a volcanic tube, if you will, that was opened at both ends. And because of what's known as the Venturi principle, which causes air to rapidly cool going through such a tube, ice over the centuries formed. And what they would do in Shoshone is drive up there in the wagon and cut some out and bring it back and put their beer on ice. And it made it one of the few, if not the only, small communities in the West. At that time it was fairly large because it was a hub for the new railroad going west, that could boast cold beer for anyone who needed it at the end of a hard day's work. And as I pan about here, you'll see what I mean. This entire topography here is covered with this lava. Here's another slightly better view of these swirls, if you will, in the lava that represent its actual flow at some point in time. All right, now up the road a little bit, I can illustrate to you what I mean by its flowing on or under the surface. Here is a perfect example. Notice what we have here is a hole, and you can see a crack right along the middle of this video frame right now. And there in particular, and I'll get closer now, and you can see where in fact what was the tube at one time has broken apart. Now, lifting up, you'll see an example of its formation on the surface. Here you can see these bulges. Now, to back up a bit, you'll see here that we have two. They look like mounds, and they probably are. But look closely at them, and you'll see that something has caused them to push upward when they were forming, and then when they dried, they cracked open. And the cracks tend to radiate from the top down along the sides, representing probably the main and obvious stress points. And this one here, now you can see a crack that runs right, almost straight across it. Now, when those are filled with air and run for any distance, that's where you get the tubes. This sign next to the lava flows says the following. It's Goodale's Cutoff. When immigrants began to take their westbound wagons along an old Indian and trappers trail past this lava, they had to develop a wild and winding road. At this spot, like many others, they had barely enough space to get by. At times they could not avoid lava stretches, but they slowly crept along, leaving their road strewn with parts of broken wagons. J.C. Merrill noted in 1864 that at one place we were obliged to drive over a huge rock just a little wider than the wagon. Had we gone a foot to the right or the left, the wagon would have rolled over. Okay, we have now just entered the National Monument of Craters of the Moon. and I'll pan this initial spot. This is not the center of the monument, I'm sure. One thing you'll notice as we look through here, that there are green patches, obviously evidencing vegetation, and then these raw lava areas. My guess is, I'm not a geologist and I haven't seen any more information yet this morning, but my guess simply is that the raw lava simply represents a newer lava flow than the other having been much older and accumulated dirt sufficient enough, probably blown there by wind or whatever, to allow for vegetation. All right, now we're at the top of the lava flow. Notice that right ahead of us are several small hills that are lava hills. How they were formed, I don't yet know. But down beneath us, you'll see the flow of the lava, and you can see it flowed towards us as well as down to our right. And you can actually see in some locations, like right down in there, the actual flow pattern of its movement. And notice it's literally devoid of vegetation. That's where we were a few minutes ago. The geological dynamic of this kind of volcano is called a squeeze up, and you can see from the diagram how it works. Basically, the pressure from beneath in a little cauldron ball, if you will, or hole, breaks the crust, and the lava from below runs out on top. The key difference between this and the more spectacular volcanoes is the nature of the escaping gas. If the gas is very volatile and explodes outward, then it creates the explosion pyrotectic type of volcano that you might see on the Philippines as well as in Hawaii. Whereas this kind of volcano is an extremely quiet one. It simply oozes out and can form colossal shields, such as the shield along the Columbia River in Oregon, which is hundreds of miles square and several hundred, if not thousands, of feet deep. Now here you can see an example of, or a definition of, the pressure ridges. These are caused when you have a lava that's under pressure versus lava in a normal flow, which is on the left-hand side of the diagram there. When it's under pressure, it of course is forcing everything up or away from it, whichever way it will move most easily, and most easily of course is up where there are no obstructions except for air. Then when it cools off and the lava has moved on through these tubes, if you will, then cracking begins. Now if we raise the camera here, you'll see that we're looking right now at, right here close to us, is such a pressure ridge apparently. As you see that it appears, and I'll go back this way, it appears to be definitely raised a little bit higher and domed right here. Now if you look here, it seems to be domed higher in the center. And notice also that the cracks, and I'll raise the camera up above my head, and you can look down, that it seems to be cracks there indicating this dynamic that they're talking about of lava inside of a tube under pressure. Okay, this is a newer volcanic cone that we're looking at here, as opposed to one, and I'll sweep fairly fast just so you'll see it and know what it is when we come back to it, a much older cone. The cone we're looking at now, which is much older, is about 7,500 years old, it is estimated. And the one that we just looked at, and we'll swing back to it in a moment, is about 2,000. Now, one of the things that tells you this and characterizes age is the nature of the vegetation on these cones. You'll notice that the cone that we're looking at right now, of course, has considerable vegetation. We'll focus a little closer on it. But specifically what it has is sagebrush and Douglas fir, as well as the fact that it's covered with a lot more vegetation than this cone to our left here. Now, this cone is characterized by obviously less vegetation, although some forming. Here at the left, probably some kind of sagebrush, but basically there's a difference in the tree foliage in that what we see here is limber pine and antelope bitterbrush. Interesting that you can tell time by looking at the nature of vegetation. And one of the factors involved in this is that vegetation, or plant communities, spring up according to the caliber or the quality or the nature of the soil that's on that existing spot. And soil, of course, changes successively with each new plant community. So what this cone here has done, at least its vegetation, is it's gone through a long process of successive changes in plant community vegetation until it's achieved this higher level of vegetation community than the much newer cone. Now I'm going to sweep the camera around because we're coming to an area here that's probably going to be quite interesting, and I don't know anything about it yet, but this way you'll see it from a distance off, and when we get to read the interpretive signs, it'll be a little more meaningful. Now here's another example, same thing that we've seen before, of this lava. But what I want to show you is the dynamic of these tubes shown even in the smallest of little bits of flow. Notice right ahead of us there's a broken portion, dead center right now in the video. And if you look up there a little bit, towards the top now in the center, you'll see that you can actually see inside of what is one of these very small tubes. Now this whole tube measures not more than 4 inches across. The hole on the inside probably not more than an inch or so. And here over a little bit further you can see a hole going down into one of the tubes. Okay, here we have a couple of word definitions. 2 Hawaiian words, pahoho and a. Pahoho, smooth or ropey lava, that's what we looked at a moment ago. Cooler lava which hardens on the surface, what's called extruded lava or magma. Hotter, more fluid lava runs under it, often leaving caves or tubes behind. Aha, rough and jagged lava. The molten lava is much less fluid and usually moves slower. A crust never hardens on the surface, but chunks of cooler rocks humble along the top and sides instead. Aha can be impassable, i.e. the same kind of lava that was complained about by the Oregon Trail pioneers. Okay, these big monoliths that we're looking at are actually chunks or fragments of the North Crater. That's the one that's the most recent, about 2,000 years ago. And as we said, as the interpretive sign we looked at a few moments ago said, that this is the second form of the lava, the aha, that moves slowly and carries large chunks with it. This apparently is an example of one of those large chunks, and as you can see from this diagram, when the cone, volcanic cone, had been created, either because of the weight of the lava or because of earthquakes, a side of the cone broke apart. The lava began to move down the and carried these large chunks with it. And you can see in this diagram, for example, some large chunks there indicating there. This is presumably that same dynamic. If we look at this small bit of rock, you'll see an interesting dynamic. Notice the piece in the lower left-hand corner. That represents the sheath, or the very outer surface. But what you can tell that's interesting here is that all the orange part represents lava flowing just beneath the surface, so that as the top part apparently started to harden up a little bit. Underneath, not more than an inch or two, the lava was still flowing, and that's why you have those flow marks underneath there, whereas you don't see those flow marks on the surface of the lava an inch or two higher. Now, something about the flowers or vegetation and how it gets here, I think something that's rather interesting. How does it take so long, 2,000 to 7,500 years, before there's tremendous amount of vegetation versus just a spattering or none? And it's caused, first of all, lichens, which are composed of two things, and I can't remember what they are. They arrive first. Arrive, I don't know what that means. Sounds like immaculate conception, but anyway, they arrive. The acids in lichens erode the rock slowly. Wind, rain, and ice also form their weathering processes that break down this soil. Then some soil is brought in by the wind. In fact, they allege that most of it is. That may be at issue. It settles in the crevices between the rocks, and one of the benefits of settling in the crevices is that is then protected from future wind, that soil. And when the water drops in there, then a few seeds that are maybe blown by the wind, then that vegetation can get a grip. Another factor, of course, is that the more vegetation roots also break down soils, not only with their chemical reaction with those soils, but also the force of a root. You've seen a root that pushes its way up through a cement driveway or an asphalt driveway. Same dynamic occurs right here. We'll just leave this camera on and just kind of walk with it a bit, and you can just see what I'm seeing this morning. It's about 6:30 this morning. Here on these rocks are various lichens. Lichens to a park service, a geologist or an ecologist, plant biologist, are what are called indicator species because they indicate the quality of the air, if you will, in an area. Because lichen will absorb the pollutants directly from the air, which are toxin, and relative to the degree of breakdown of lichen cells, that indicates the degree of pollution. Now, fortunately, up till this time, the air at this particular monument is probably some of the cleanest in the country. At least the Park Service alleges that, but it also points out that this is beginning to change. That in fact, pollution from hundreds of miles away is beginning to show evidence here in this national monument. It asks the question, what can the Park Service do with regard to this pollution, this increasing pollution? What could you as citizens do? And that's a very, very good question. An interesting management story and lesson is learned here from these pines. Many of these, as we notice around this monument, are dead. They're dead because of a parasite known as the Dwarf Miseltoe, which after it attaches itself to a branch, it secretes a hormone that stimulates the tree to send additional food supplies to the infested area, which then creates, probably because of the increased nutrition, these proliferation or clumps of branches known as witches' brooms. Now, the problem came when the Park Service decided that if they didn't stop this bad, quote-unquote, bad infestation, then all of the trees would be killed here. They ultimately realized that, in fact, there is a relationship between the mistletoe and the trees and their death, and that this is a natural process that goes on here. Theoretically, to the advancement of the plant community itself. And as a consequence, they killed 5,000 of these trees before they realized their error, which they now have corrected and let it go back to its natural way. It illustrates the classic problem of human beings making good, bad value judgments versus judgments based on scientific information. A classic example of this was the killing of a small snail that is used in one of the main river systems or lake systems for the spawning of salmon, which the bald eagle feasts on. And at this one time, and I can't remember the name of the place, it would gather thousands of bald eagles. Now there are none, and there are no salmon because those small snails were killed. Bad management decision. In front of you is a cinder cone, and of course it's a relatively new one because there's almost no vegetation on it. We'll climb to the top of that, or I will, so that I, in fact, and you vicariously, can say you've been to the top of a volcano. I'll talk to you when I get to the top. Might be several hours now. In the distance is the big Southern Butte. It was a volcano, it is a volcano, approximately 300,000 years old, and was here as one of the earliest of volcanoes in this area, which covers a total area, which we'll pan in a moment, of approximately 30,000 square miles. And I'll just begin to slowly pan around. And we'll just sweep about here, and you'll be able to see, you can tell these cinder cones because they look like cones. So notice way off in the distance there's one that's kind of got a little valley or bow in the front and in the middle of it, and that of course is where it probably exploded out, and the sides of the volcano were ripped apart. Now notice right here, you can see that classically. You can see how the volcano was built, and then the side broke open, and the lava rushed down and to the left, to our left, going now filled with trees. But you can actually see the outflow of lava there. Okay, now let's look at a couple of things. We'll pan back here quickly to where these people are standing up here on this ridge right here. You can imagine behind them is a crater for that particular cone, and you can see how the left half of that has been blown away when the crater was formed. Now, interestingly enough, what we are standing on here is in fact not a volcanic cone in the usual sense. In fact, right down there, right in between those two humps, was where the vent of this volcano was, down there on the bottom. What happened was that strong winds coming over that volcanic cone beyond us, towards us, at the time of the volcanic eruption, took all of the debris and literally piled it into this big hill that we're on right now. So in fact, if we were looking for the center of the volcano, it would be down there, hidden under that debris in that little rock pile. And where we stand here is all of the debris that was blown up here. Now, I don't know if I can pick it up correctly because I'm not sure if I'm using this macro feature on this video camera correctly, but this entire mountain that I'm standing on that you saw me climb up is composed of all this little debris, these little cinders, volcanic cinders. They're fairly lightweight because they're basically hollow, and that's it. And it's easy enough to see how under enough gas pressure they could be blown out this high. Now notice this is also the opposite of the kind of lava that we saw down below. This was in fact blown out very explosively by the hot gases. whereas the lava we saw down beneath, of course, flows out with very little drama. You can get a rough idea from here how high this hill of cinders is. Now, as I've said before, if you're going to be a history or geography teacher, you should have been trained by the Green Berets for Vietnam. Otherwise, you don't want to attempt these kind of stiff hill climbs. However, I can instruct you as to how to do it safely if you wish. We'll pan on a little farther just to show you where we were a little while ago, all throughout this area. There's the visitor center over there. That's it. Now, all about here you can see fairly good sized little rocks. Some of them may be a foot long, whatever. There are things called volcanic bombs, which can be very large globules that are heaved out initially in the very beginning, and they form, because they're molten, they form into a round globule, and they are just like bombs. What we'll look at now are spatter cones versus cinder cones. Spatter cones are in this upper diagram, which we'll try and get to focus on, are caused when a little gas makes a lava bubble at the vent, in other words at the top, and then it throws up blobs for a few feet of lava, blobs of lava. They plop back, still sticky, and build spatter cones. They're very, very fragile. Now, the difference between those and the cinder cones is much more gas. The gas whips the lava up into a fine froth. That's that small gravel that you saw. And it throws these lightweight fragments several hundred feet into the air. After they cool, they fall back around the central vent to form the cinder cones. Now, just looking at this surface up fairly close, you can see that these are all globs, or were globs of lava. Notice this one, which you can see that it was opened in the center, very much like those tubes that we talked about. And you can see that it looks very much Swiss cheese or sponge looking. And this is just these plops of lava thrown up in the air and then drop back. Now we'll get to take a look down inside of one. Okay, there you are looking into the vent. Now here's another such cone, but with a rather interesting twist. Down at the bottom, if you can barely make it out, the white that you see is snow. The snow is able to survive down here throughout this summer because it's down at the bottom of this cone and protected, and not much sunlight gets to it. Okay, we're now up on top of the large cinder cone that we looked at when we were up on top looking at this whole area a few moments ago, up on top of the Great Mountain, we'll call it. And I'll explain what these various points are here, but this will orientate you. You can see where we are, right where it says you are here over on the left hand, lower middle left hand of the video. Okay, now let's pan over and take a look at that. Okay, this whole thing that we're looking at here is a cinder cone complex. Over there on the ridge just behind us is still another older cinder cone that's part of this complex. Some things to note. Number one, this is a long crater, as you'll notice, and that's because it's formed on a fissure or a crack or break in the surface here, the surface of the earth, as opposed to coming out a single hole, such as a perfect cinder cone might have been formed from. Also, looking over here, let me focus down on it, there's a small ledge of rock we can still see. That is the last remnant of what once was the pool of lava in the bottom of this volcano. Now, Yellowstone, if you look at the map of Yellowstone, you will see that it also has a volcano. It's in fact one of the largest probably in the world. And what you're seeing when you drive through Yellowstone, you in fact are on top of a remaining lava pool that is hardened. Now, while it's not altogether noticeable, Over here in this area is another small lava flow, and that represents the or the one in which at the very end, in the last gasps, if you will, of this volcano's activity, it threw a bunch of plops in the air, which then flowed down with some lava. Now, one other small point, if we go back down the trail that we walked, right over in here, you'll see a lava flow, and that's from a secondary lava, or what they call a parasitic vent. Parasite meaning it lives off of the parent or the host. And what that means is that when one volcano has opened up, oftentimes smaller vents form around the base of it and kick out even more debris. Now, one thing I forgot to mention is that this section over here, it's called an agglutinated spatter flow. That's A-G-G-L-U-T-I-N-A-T-E-D. And it's simply, I just wanted to give you the word since I know it's one you'll cherish. It just describes what I spoke of, or described this as a few moments ago. Okay, here's a little bit different view or perspective down into the crater here. There's that wall, if you will, of the old magma pool. And here you'll notice that this is a fairly high hill compared to the rest of the topography. And that's for the same dynamic that occurred on the hill we were standing on. The wind was blowing from our left to our right at the time that this volcano popped its cork, and the debris ended up piling up on the leeward side, if you will. Leeward meaning downwind side. These two holes that you see, one at the bottom center, the other at the top center, we'll get closer, are what are called tree molds. And these are formed when the lava flows around a standing tree. The tree begins to burn, but not until it doesn't totally burn away until the lava has cooled enough to form around this. Now, right now here are two posts that say tree molds. To the left of those, each one, you'll see another form of tree mold, and that's a mold formed over a tree that had already fallen on the ground. Notice this one here, where we can see a long little trench, and over here you can see another one. Now let's get down there closer, and we'll actually be able to look at not only the length of the tree, as you can see right there, but then let's look at this one more closely. It starts right here, moves along. Let's walk over here a ways. There you go, and you can see the trench as it moves right up there all the way along. Now we can get even closer and actually look right here at the cracks in the bark. Right there, okay? And here a little bit more. Here was some kind of a check. There was that line that runs up there, right along there on the left-hand side, the little one right in the center too. Those would be checks, or what the logger would refer to as cracks. Elongated cracks running the length of the log. And here we can see what must have been the broken off end of that log. Notice here right next to us, still again another. So even though the wood began to burn, no doubt, it did not burn fast enough to be burned away before the lava began to cool. Okay, just to give you an idea of perspective, there's the, right in the center is the tall, large cinder volcano that we climbed up and looked at a little while ago, just a few minutes ago. I'll pan across here and you'll get a rough idea of the dimension of this flow just where we are. Now remember, this covers apparently 30,000 square miles. That's a 100 by 300 mile area. I'm sure it's not laid out in precise block form. But it was over there where that hill comes down to the horizon that we were first off this morning. A bleak and barren landscape, except that there are many places in it where at least animals live. There are deer, birds, pikas, brown squirrels. Would probably have been fairly decent mountain lion country, except that we've killed them all off. Okay, the first tunnel that we're going to go into is Indian Tunnel. And as this points out again, the hoi hoi lava is the hottest and the most fluid. And it moves under the surface of the earth and then breaks out onto the surface. As the surface of the lava cools, the part inside continues to flow. As it hardens on the outside of these tubes, it creates in essence the ceiling and the tube walls. But then as the flow of lava slackens, the molten lava drips out of the caves beneath the crust on the top of the tube and leaves stalactites on the ceiling, and will leave various stream levels on the walls. So we'll go down inside here and take a look. Swallows live in here also. Notice the dimension of this, how huge it is, probably 30-40 feet in height. And if it had never broken in, it's difficult to tell how long it could have been or might have been. But we'll see as we go back along the trail. And there you can look down and see how it breaks out again. Here's one of the examples of the ultimate destiny of caves, and that is to crumble in. But look at the tremendous amount of rock that was on top of that before it crumbled. Notice also the lichen all along the surface. And if you look closely here, you'll see what are very small stalactites. Now, these are caused by lava dripping, not the long ones in the limestone caves caused by water and the limestone deposits they leave. And you can see sub-caves going off here to the side. As we go back up the stairs, you can see how the cave continues on. And all of this rubble is what fell in at this point. Now here is a collapsed roof of a cave, and it's the destiny of all caves. It occurs for two reasons. Number one, when the tube is first formed, if the ceiling was rather weak, as the ceiling hardens, it's a thin crust, and the crust may well drop in or fold in to the cave immediately if you get any kind of sudden pressure, air pressure from inside from the volcano or some kind of movement of the Earth's surface at that time. On the other hand, if it has maintained itself for some considerable amount of time, it still may cave in as a result of the weathering forces of nature, the enlargement of the cracks that were left in the surface shortly after the tube was formed as it shrank. Now sometimes when the cave ceiling weakens, it doesn't necessarily just crash down in a pile, as you can see from the one we just looked at and the one we're looking at over there. I'm now panning across the length of it. Sometimes it will just slowly fold downward and create a depression, and that's what we have right here. This usually occurs, if not always, at the early formation stages of this cave. This is Beauty Cave, and I'm not sure how much we'll get down here you have to have a flashlight. So I'll turn this off until I can work my way down inside and see what we see. Okay, I doubt you can see much in here at all. My flashlight is not that bright for the space. It's not very high, as you can see. Here's a crack in here. This is one of the cracks, for example, that allows water to seep in here, which you can hear seeping, and eventually begin to crack, enlarge those cracks enough that the ceiling weakens and everything falls in. As you can see, other things have already fallen in. It's instantly cool enough here that you can see your breath. If you're out in the desert in this area in the daytime and being overcome by heat, what an excellent way to save your life. This is Boy Scout Cave, and again the same situation. We need a flashlight when we go in, but we'll see if we can see anything after I climb down here.